2. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, DevSecOps Lessons from a First Responder, brought to you by Everbridge. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping announcements. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit devops.com/webinars, and it will be available for you there as well. We are taking questions from the audience throughout the presentation. Use your webinar interface to submit questions into the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many as possible at the end. Finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stay tuned to see if you're a winner. Joining me today is Matt Frauenhofer, Solutions Architect, X Matters, and Everbridge Company. And with that, I'm now going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and let you get started.
All right. Thanks, Julio. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Frauenhofer. I'm, as Julio said, a solutions architect with X Matters, an Everbridge company. But in my in the rest of my life, we'll say, I am actually a volunteer firefighter and first responder. And so it's always been interesting to me to look at the DevSecOps and incident management, incident response, and how we do it from a digital perspective, and also look at the best practices and what we do from a fire, rescue, and EMS perspective, and see the similarities and then also some of the differences. So today we're going to go through and kind of highlight some of those differences, and feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section. So generally, people don't put these two together, right? When we have a fire response or a rescue response, we've got a ladder truck, and at least back pre-COVID, our IT response for an incident would be get everybody into kind of a conference room or a war room and start off by getting all the players together. And now that's more of a virtual setting where we're grabbing, we're setting up a Teams channel or Slack channel, and we're interacting via that method. But ultimately, to respond to an incident, we have to collaborate. We have to communicate. And we also have to establish roles and responsibilities for all individuals that are part of that response. So the first principle I want to go over is what we call scene safety. When we think about a fire and rescue response, we talk about scene safety. We want to make sure that we have that all aspects of the scene are safe before we put ourselves in harm's way. We want to try and control the scene as much as we possibly can, because at the end of the day, we want to get back to our families, our kids, our significant others, whatever it may be. And so the ways that we do that are through things like gaining situational awareness. When we pull up to a fire, we walk the perimeter of the structure that's on fire, or we try to see all the different areas and angles of what's going on, the car wreck, whatever it may be. We do that so we can understand what's happening. We need to do that in the IT and the digital realm as well. When we first get an alert that say a database server is down, we need to look at the different systems and the different dependencies that you might have on that database to really understand what's going on. What resources are being used by that database system? What systems does that network depend on? Or what systems depend on that network? Because ultimately, that's going to help you determine where you need to attack first. We oftentimes utilize floor plans. Now, of course, they may not always be accurate because things can change, but especially with commercial buildings, things of that nature, or previous history, we need to understand how the buildings are laid out as much as we possibly can before we go inside and attack the fire, or really start to dive into trying to resolve the situation. I equate these to things like dependency maps. We need to understand the architecture of our systems. Now, oftentimes we don't have those dependency maps for our applications because documentation oftentimes goes to be a backseat for a lot of our during the development process. But it is essential that we understand the architecture of a system, just like it's essential to understand the architecture of a building. We need to know when we go into a house, is there a basement or a crawl space? Because the fire may have started in the basement and now the floor underneath our feet is actually burning. We just can't necessarily see the flames yet. So there's a lot of similarities to. We need to understand that architecture. We also need to look for any uninvolved exposures. Now, this could be when we're pulling up on a fire, especially in rural areas. It could be a garage or a barn next door to the house that's on fire. But all it'll take is a wind, a gust of wind to shift for enough time to make that fire jump from that fully involved house to that garage. And now we have two structures. But if we know that that garage is there, we can start doing things to mitigate that from happening. We can start spraying it down. We can start cooling down that auxiliary structure. We can monitor that and have somebody stationed to watch that and make sure that if they see anything start to happen. We need to do the same in the digital space. We need to look for those other systems that may not be having an issue, but may be related to this, to the database or what have you, to make sure that whatever we do to try and resolve the issue, we minimize the impact to those other services that have that sort of relationship. And we also need to know our tools and equipment. So, as I was thinking through this, I was thinking about a story of a fire that we had in my area, and I was not on the scene of it, but ultimately they were pumping water for over 16 hours trying to put out an old abandoned school. And they, at the end of the day, they had worked that engine, that fire engine, so hard that the exhaust that was coming out of the engine actually started melting the asphalt that it was parked on. And I thought, well, if we had a grass fire and that engine was parked on the side of the road, what would happen if if we had been pumping and that the grass next to the engine had started on fire? Well, that would have been obviously a decent problem that we'd have to resolve. We need to know that that is a risk with our tool set and our equipment that we use as firefighters. Same thing can happen with our digital tools. When we have a digital tool, say a piece of automation, we need to know that this command could actually wipe out the database instead of backing it up, or this command could restore the wrong system or wrong backup to a router for the different routing tables or what have you, and completely corrupt that configuration. We need to understand the limitations and the risks of using the different tools that we have. We also need to understand our potential hazards at a scene. So we need to find our propane tanks when we're on a fire scene, especially a house. If you see a grill or any sort of garage or anything like that, we always go looking for those propane tanks, because inevitably, if we find one and they get exposed to the immense heat of a fire, they're going to explode. The same would go for any sort of ammunition. If the homeowner has guns, uh, electrical service and power, water and electricity don't really mix, and so if there's live wires, uh, we can't start the extrication for, say, a car fire or a car accident. We can't start the rescue process without if there's an electrical line on top of that car, because then we're putting ourselves at risk and the person is actually safer staying inside the car. So we need to identify those immediate threats, but then we also need to know about any potential long-term impacts. If there are hazardous materials, if there's an oil spill that has occurred, or oil that could be burning, if that oil is next to, let's say, a creek, well, now you're potentially contaminating well water. We need to look at and think through, this isn't an immediate threat to me, but long term, that's a risk that we need to mitigate. We need to put up some buoys, we need to put some guards around it. And finally, your people, because your people, with the best of intentions, can be potential hazards. Oftentimes in major disasters, especially with volunteer fire departments like I'm on, we don't get a break. If we get, let's say, a tornado that comes through, I live in the Midwest and we have a lot of tornadoes. We had one recently in a neighboring department. They worked pretty well for 36 hours straight. Very little sleep in between, but it was call after call after call for help. And so people just make mistakes when they're being sleep deprived or when they're under immense pressure. And so you need to pay attention to how your people are doing during your times of crises and your outages, because as the time goes on, you need to have a plan for, when do I pull in new people? When do I get new people in to try and to keep working on this, rather than having those people at the keyboard? I remember one of my first outages in my IT career was in a healthcare facility. We were doing an upgrade, and the database portion of the upgrade went wrong, and the main DBA and system administrators, they got so tired that they took a back seat. They let me put hands on the keyboard, and they just observed. They told me what they wanted done, and then I did it, because if they did not trust their fingers to type the correct commands, we need to make sure that we understand and watch for those potential hazards. We also need to be aware of our surroundings, what weather conditions there are. Out on a rescue operation during storms, that can be very different. If it's raining or snowing, you have slippery conditions. All of that can impact how you go about different rescue operations on the side of an interstate. Freeway and highway traffic, a huge risk for firefighters. What's going on around you? And then fires jumping roads. If you've got a field fire, when the wind kicks up and goes in the right direction, I need to pay attention. Is there a dry cornfield on the other side of that road that, now if that jumps, I now have another field that I have to deal with? Be aware of what's going on around you. Be aware of, this service is down right now, but don't forget, you've got 30 other IT services that you need to be aware of, because if they start to be affected, maybe you're actually dealing with something a bit bigger than just that one isolated incident. And finally, what I call mutual aid. In in at least Illinois and throughout the nation, mutual aid agreements between fire departments are a very common thing. If you've got small volunteer departments, whenever we have a fire, our neighboring departments also will get paged out. Will request, and there's a term called a MABUS box, and there are different levels of those boxes that we can call to get other departments and other resources to our scene and to help us out. And they can do the same thing when they have an incident. We always try to get them started before we need them. Now, you don't want to call in 20 different fire departments before you even get on scene, but at least call in one or two, especially if the conditions warrant it. If it's during the day, oftentimes it's a lot harder to get your volunteer department staffed during the day than it is during the evening. They're not as easily able to leave work. And so you get your neighboring departments started, and you might cancel them if you get there and you're able to knock it out, but it's better to cancel them than to be there, need them, and then start them, because now it's additional time that they could have already been on the road. Get the right teams for the right situation, especially when you're dealing with digital incidents. If you've got a service that goes down and it looks like it might be related to the network, or, I mean, let's face it, have to use Facebook as an example. If there's a problem with your BGP routing tables, make sure that you're getting the correct team that handles that involved right away. But you might also want to get some of your other subject matter experts that may not necessarily be on that team also involved in the incident. If you don't need them, you can always dismiss them from the call later down the line, but at least you've started them. At least you're getting their expertise there quicker. The faster you can resolve these issues, the less impact you'll have to your organization. The second principle that I came up with is rehearse and train for the unexpected. So obviously, you can see from the picture here, that's definitely not the normal car accident that everybody would have, that most people would expect, and we still have to train for that, because the person that is in that car, it's still our job to try and get them out and help them as best as we can. And so we have to take our knowledge, our expertise, our experiences, and ultimately do what we can to help that individual. So what do we do for that? Well, we need to rehearse and train for the unexpected. Regular rehearsals. Use what you have. If you have non-production environments, then absolutely use them. If your non-production environments are complete 100% replicas of your production environment, even better. But ultimately, you just need to start rehearsing what will happen when something occurs. And don't necessarily make it believable. You need to make sure that you toss in some variability. If I'm always training for the single situation, or even say 5 use cases, 5 examples of failures, if I don't start varying that, I'm going to be really good if one of those 5 happen. But if something deviates from those 5 kind of standard scenarios that we've trained for, I'm very likely going to be kind of like a fish out of water, and I'm going to start to panic, and I'm not going to be able to solve the issues as effectively as I can. We've all heard of Taco Tuesday. Well, especially at X Matters, we practice what we preach, and we do Failure Fridays. And our ops team and our SRE teams, they all will get onto the they'll simulate failures in a dedicated environment and rehearse how they would respond and how they would bring up those various components. And they vary the situations whenever uh, so that they're able to flex based off of the individual situation. So it's a great practice to actually dedicate time to. It may not seem like it's going to ultimately pay off, but it will, and it will make all the people involved in these rehearsals better at at thinking. I hate to say it, but thinking agilely, thinking quickly on their feet. You also need to do regular training. You need to learn your tools. So you can see here they've got the what are commonly known as the jaws of life, and they're practicing extrication. Fire departments oftentimes they will have wrecked cars donated to them from towing companies, individuals that total their cars and they have no use for them, or just have old cars that they're looking for the tax write-off here in the U.S. They will donate those to their local fire departments, and then on a weekly basis, we have fire training, or we have rescue training, or EMS training. We're constantly training at the fire department to make sure that we're keeping up our skills, because it may not be that often where we get a car accident. In fact, we haven't had a car accident here, knock on wood, for quite a long time, past few months. But it could happen tomorrow, and we can't let our skills and our abilities atrophy to the point where when it does happen, we're trying to figure out from scratch how to respond. This goes for leadership too. Leadership should know how to use those tools, because while they don't do it on a regular basis, my chief is fully able to step in and fully willing to step in and help on any scene that we go to as a fire department. But even though that's not his job, he's able to do it. And he sets the example. He dedicates budget and time for our department and for our people to go out and get training from different academies. There are different academies for fire departments to learn about, especially here in the Midwest, grain bins during harvest time. If somebody falls in, there's certain things that you do to try and help those individuals get out of there quicker. And it's a particular skill set that you have to have. You need to learn those tools and dedicate your budget and time for your people to go to those trainings. If there's a new remediation tool that your organization has procured, make sure that your people are not just using it, but they're being continually trained on it. Just getting training once is not going to be enough to make them truly effective with that tool and that platform. Principle 3 is prevention as part of response planning. So oftentimes we think of response as the reactionary response. Well, actually, prevention of fires and incidents is part of that response planning. When we go, we want to make sure, especially from a fire perspective, that people are prepared to get out. Kids, especially, when they're in a stressful situation and they see one of us all geared up with our SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, and a face mask and everything on, they will get scared. And that is why we go to schools, usually actually this week, to do during Fire Prevention Week, to do sessions with those kids. We put on all the gear so they can see us. And then we help them do fire drills, etc. And we often will open up our firehouse for those kids to come in and see the trucks so that they're not scared when they see us. They know that we're there to help. There are several things that you can do even within IT to help prevent issues. Building codes, to me, for on a fire perspective, they're making sure that you've run electrical properly, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very much like app architecture standards in an organization. You want to make sure that you're building your software in a resilient manner. And when you're using it in production, that it can handle a failure of a single component. And then we need to do that testing, and we need to verify during the building process with inspections. You can now make an analogy to building inspections, that at every level and every stage, we need to make sure that we're testing and validating that our architecture is good. We can do things like chaos engineering and chaos testing, where we are just throwing all sorts of random stuff at our software to make sure that it can handle it. We want to introduce dynamic application security testing and static analysis, static code analysis testing. And then also automated functional unit performance testing, etc. We want all of that to happen on a regular, repeatable basis. But we also need to make sure that we don't just keep running the tests and only care about what those tests do. We need to do exploratory testing. We need to try to break things. We need to deviate off the common path of what we think somebody will do, especially from a user experience standpoint. Because otherwise, we're going to be really good at coding to those tests. But at the end of the day, we all know our end users, they don't follow the test scripts. They just don't. They're going to find a way to break the system. And it's not malicious, but they're going to break the system. And we need to try and get ahead of that as much as possible. We also, like I said, do open houses, where just a couple of weeks ago, we had an open house at my fire department, and we invite the community out. We have a fundraiser. The kids come out. They can play in the trucks. They get to see our equipment. They get to spray some water. It's a great time. Do that for your IT teams. Do that for the different application teams. Invite your stakeholders and your customers, your end users, to come in and see how you're building the applications. Bring them in to talk about how the application could be better for them and their experience. Give them a little glimpse into what you're doing, because a lot of times the business side of IT, often the business will see IT as simply we're all individuals that are writing the application. They forget that there's humans behind all that. And so by bringing them in and showing them that, yes, we are people just like you writing this code. We have a different skill set. We are not doing what we're doing. We're not coding this to make your life difficult, but we need you to help tell us how we can make things better. We need to involve them, and they need to involve us. It needs to become a partnership. And these open houses are a great way to informally make that happen. Now, obviously, in time of COVID, everything is now virtual, but I think a lot of us, I'm not going to say everybody, but a lot of us and a lot of our organizations have gotten really good at building out virtual events and virtual open houses. And so I would highly encourage organizations to start really doing that on a regular basis. And principle 4 is communication planning. When you come up to a fire scene, there are oftentimes roles and responsibilities that need to be doled out. And depending on your fire department, that could be a group of 3 guys and gals, or it could be a full company or 2 of your truck company or engine company and rescue. It all depends on the organization. But Everybody needs to understand their role. And part of that role is as an incident commander, the person who's in charge. And it's not just the person who is the highest rank. Oftentimes, especially in the fire service, that's what it is. You've got your chief, and when they're on scene, they're in charge. But even then, sometimes those chiefs, they get there a few minutes later, and they will leave the person that showed up first. They will leave them in charge to see how they do, to help develop them. But everybody knows their role. You want to shield your firefighters or your workers, in this case, from the media, quote unquote. Oftentimes, especially during fires and bad car accidents, etc., we will get news organizations, newspapers, etc., coming to the scene, uh, public bystanders, and they will want to try and talk to us and understand what's going on. And I don't blame them. I want to know what's going on too. But the time that I, as a firefighter, take away from helping my patients, helping put out the fire, that's time away from actually doing and resolving the incident successfully. It is the incident commander or the leadership's position to shield those individuals from your media, which in this case might be your C-level executives. Don't let your C-levels walk into a war room to take over and try to get things resolved, because ultimately that will slow down the resolution process, because they get apprehensive. They want to know what's going on. They want constant status updates. I don't know about everybody else, but I am not the world's greatest multitasker. I can't talk and give a high level briefing of what's going on in an issue while also trying to fix the issue. Stay calm. Words said in the moment are not usually personal. And this is especially apparent with fire departments, but the adrenaline kicks in when we've got a fire. We're trying to knock it down. We're trying to prevent it from harming people or individual things, etc. The words that are said when things aren't going right or when that adrenaline is up, those are not personal. Everybody can can have feelings about how those words were said and what was said, but at the end of the day, you have to trust and know that they were said in the heat of the moment, and they're not personal. Now, obviously, there are definite times where that's not the case, and we need to be aware of that. But don't just default to thinking that somebody is out to get you, especially when you're communicating during an active incident. And then finally, practice your communication between teams. And this could be different groups within an organization. It could be between external vendors and your organization. But use common language. If I call something a database table and somebody else is calling it a schema, we need to agree on what that is, because otherwise we're going to get confused in the heat of the moment. We don't necessarily have time to go ahead and parse out everybody's words, and ultimately that is going to come back and bite us in terms of mean time to resolution. And practice using the communication platforms that you use for your incidents. When you're practicing your incident response plan, and if you're using Slack to help coordinate that, make sure when you're doing that practice, you're using Slack. You're using the platforms and the tools to resolve the incidents just as you would during a real one. Because the more proficient you are in using those tools, the better the incident is going to run and the faster it's going to be to resolution. And so finally, I just want to give a shout out. I know uh, probably nobody from my fire department will actually be hearing this. None of them are actually in the technology industry, but I am blessed to be part of a small town. We're about 2,500 people. We cover our fire department has 25 members. We cover about 60 to 70 square miles of homes, woods, cornfields, everything you can imagine. Uh, and we're not alone. We're not the only volunteer fire department out there. It's a lot more common than you think. According to FEMA, 70% of fire departments are volunteer across the United States. And that's, I believe, as of 2019. 54% of all firefighters, again, 2019 FEMA, are volunteer, and an additional 12 on top of that are being paid per call. Now, you might say, okay, well, they're getting paid. That's usually $5 to $10 per call. And that could be a 30-minute call where we're going to help an elderly woman up out of bed, or an elderly gentleman who fell out of the shower, or it could be 7, 12, 14, 16 hours on an active fire without a break. And that pay doesn't change. That's still going to be $5, $10 at the end of the day. So just be aware that that your local fire department, and especially it turns out in Pennsylvania, 96.8% of Pennsylvania's fire departments are volunteer, or they're a combination where they've got what could be termed a duty crew of 2 or 3 firefighters, and then the rest are volunteer. So that duty crew will take out the first apparatus, and then volunteers would come to take out the rest of the equipment. And support your local fire departments. It means a lot to us to see everybody come out to different functions, open houses, bring kids by the station to see trucks. We are your neighbors, and we want to make sure that everybody's comfortable and understands where we're at when they need help. So with that, we'll turn it over for Q&A.
Excellent. Yes, we do have questions, but I also want to remind everybody that if you'd like to submit a question, just go over to the Q&A tab and submit them there. First question, what kind of tools can organizations use to help coordinate communications during a major IT outage?
So a lot of organizations, there are a lot of different tools out there, right? Obviously, we have a tool with Everbridge and Xmatters to help coordinate communications across incident response, and that is one that definitely is definitely out there. But really, at the end of the day, if you don't have budget for a dedicated tool, it's all about the planning. It doesn't have to be the most efficient process, but having something and some sort of plan is definitely better than not having any plan and just trying to wing it at the time of an incident.
Next, we have, one sec. What role does leadership normally need to play during incident management? Should they ever need to get their hands dirty?
That is a very good question. And oftentimes, no, they shouldn't need to get their hands dirty. But at the same time, too often leadership forgets about how an incident is actually run and what needs to occur. And so it doesn't hurt to make sure that they're involved from that perspective, and that they should make it a priority to be seen and be available for to actually get their hands dirty. They should feel comfortable enough to do that, and also know their limits. They don't have to be expected to be a subject matter expert in all things, but they should be able to be able and be humble and willing enough to take direction and to do some basic things when needed. Oh, looks like you're on mute, Julio.
You're right. Next question we have is, I want to do something to help my community, but I don't feel I could be a firefighter. What can I do to help and still be involved?
That's awesome. And honestly, first step is just go up to the firehouse, see what they need. Sometimes it could be food. It could just be uh, bringing the kids by if you have kids, whatever the case may be. A lot of times it's always interesting to see any sort of departments that might need or might want pictures to go onto social media or whatever. If you've got a talent for photography, maybe you can work something out to go photograph any fires and give the rights over to the fire department to use those. But I will tell you, a lot of volunteer departments, especially, they need tech help. I'm the resident IT guy of my firehouse, and we have iPads. We have different responding systems that all need updates on a regular basis, and a lot of volunteer firefighters don't have that tech background, and so that is something that I'm sure with this audience, especially if you've got volunteer departments in your area and want to volunteer, they will be more than happy to take you up on that.
Excellent. Yeah, there was a lot I didn't know about the volunteer side. It's very interesting. We also have how do you transition from one tool to another?
Yeah, that's always a tricky one. A lot of it depends on the tool itself. And oftentimes, what happens is you need to focus on the process and what you're trying to accomplish rather than the tool. Because if that changes and what you're trying to accomplish changes, then you just need to learn the intricacies of that new tool on how to accomplish that goal. And so at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you understand the outcome that you're trying to get to and then work through what it takes to get to that same outcome from one tool to another.
And this is more of a comment, but I think it's something we can all agree. It says, wow, kudos to you and your team, and a sincere thank you for all that you and your team do.
Well, thank you. We all enjoy it, and definitely think it's always good to hear from others that that were appreciated and liked out there.
This question's more on the volunteering side. Do retired firemen contribute by mentoring?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a huge amount of our, especially on our volunteer department. We've been around for over 100 years. Obviously, we don't have any members, unfortunately, anymore that were around during the initial starting of the department. But we definitely will have we have a lot of our retired firemen that come up to the station and they'll join us for trainings and still help out and still be part of it. It's often said that it's a brother and sisterhood, and once it's in your blood, you can't let it go away. So it's definitely something that that I hope to continue doing for as long as I can.
Excellent. And also, as a reminder, there is a handout for a major incident management ebook. So if you just go to the handout section, you'll be able to download it there. Another reminder that today's webinar has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending an email with a link to access the webinar on demand. And it will also be available on devops.com. Just look in the on-demand section in the webinars page, and it will be there. And for today's 4 Amazon gift card winners, our first winner today is Diego G. Congratulations, Diego. Our second winner is Joao M. Congratulations. Our third winner is Reza A. And our final winner is Jennifer F. So congratulations to our winners. We'll be reaching out to you via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, check your spam folder. And I'm just looking through the Q&A section there. Nothing yet. Give it another couple of seconds. And I know you mentioned it before, but how long have you been volunteering now?
I have been part of a couple departments over the past about 10 years.
10 years, wow.
Yep.
Again, a lot of great comments. Thank you. Definitely. Okay, well,
Absolutely.
there are no more questions. So thanks again, Matt, for an excellent webinar. Very informative, both on the IT side and volunteering as well. So that was great. And thanks again to the audience for joining. This is Julio Godinez signing off until next time. Be well.
Thanks, everybody.